The Velhari ship moved through the dark like a slow, careful thought. It had been traveling for 11 months, carrying a crew of 42, and a message that the High Council of the Velhari Collective had spent 6 years carefully writing. The message was simple, as far as messages go. It said hello. It said we come in peace. It said we have been watching your star system from a great distance, and we believe you are ready to meet your neighbors. The planet they were heading toward was small. It sat near the edge of the Milky Way, a blue-green world wrapped in white clouds, orbiting a yellow star that nobody important had ever paid attention to. The Velhari had picked up the planet's radio signals about 40 years ago. Those old signals were strange, full of noise and music and what sounded like arguments. The Velhari had studied them for a long time. Their scientists had said the people on that planet were still very new, still primitive, in the way most civilizations were primitive before they found their footing in the stars. Counselor Oreth Von stood at the front of the ship and looked at the star growing slowly larger in the window. He had been chosen for this mission because he was patient, smart, and good at talking to people who were afraid of him. First contact was always delicate. The new species had to be handled gently. You did not want to frighten them. You did not want to overwhelm them with too much information at once. You came slowly. You came with open hands. You spoke softly. He had done this before, twice, with 2 other young civilizations. Both times it had gone well. He expected this time would be no different. The probe was sent ahead of the ship, as was standard. It carried the greeting package, a small data file with basic mathematics, light-frequency communication patterns, and the standard opening message. The probe would travel to the edge of the planet's moon, activate its signal, and wait. They expected to wait several months, maybe years, for a response. It activated its signal. 17 seconds later, it received a reply. Oreth Von was called to the communication room so fast that he spilled his drink. He stood in front of the screen and stared. The message coming back was not in mathematics. It was not in light frequencies. It was written in clean, perfect Velhari script, the kind that took Velhari children years to learn properly. The translation sat beside it, though no translation was needed for anyone on board. Hello. We are glad you finally reached out. We have been looking forward to meeting you in person. Please proceed to the station orbiting our moon. The docking coordinates are attached. We have prepared rooms for your delegation. If there are any foods your species cannot eat, please send us a list and we will make sure your meals are appropriate. Welcome. Nobody in the communication room said anything for a long time. Oreth Von read the message 3 times. His hands were very still. His mind, however, was running fast. They knew the Velhari language. They knew there was a delegation. They had already built a station on their moon, one large enough to host visitors. They had been expecting this. Not just prepared for the idea of it, actually expecting it, as if they had been sitting by the door, waiting for a knock. He turned to his assistant, a young Velhari named Seath, and asked quietly, "Pull up everything we have on this planet. Everything in our records." Seath worked for a moment. Then she looked up, and the expression on her face was one Oreth Von had never seen on her before. "The records are there," she said slowly. "There's quite a lot of them, but sir, most of them are locked. The archive has sealed them. It says access requires authorization from the Galactic Accord Commission." "We don't belong to the Galactic Accord Commission," Oreth Von said. "No," said Seath. "We don't." Oreth Von looked back at the screen. The message from the small blue planet was still glowing there, patient and warm and impossibly polite. He felt something move through him that was not quite fear and not quite excitement. It sat exactly between the two. He typed a reply, accepting the invitation. He kept it short. He did not know what else to say. As the ship turned toward the moon station and its docking lights blinked on like tiny welcoming stars, Oreth Von asked the ship's main database one more question. He asked it how a planet that had been sending radio signals 40 years ago now had a space station, spoke Velhari, and had a sealed galactic file. The database processed his question for a long time. That alone was unusual. The database almost never took long. Then it gave him its answer. Insufficient data. The species designated as humans has a galactic history file that has been sealed, restricted, and flagged by 17 separate governing bodies. This unit does not have the clearance required to access it. Recommend direct inquiry upon arrival. Oreth Vaughn read the answer twice. Then he sat down very carefully in his chair and said nothing for the rest of the journey to the moon. Luna Station did not look new. That was the first thing Oreth Vaughn noticed when the ship docked. He had expected the station to be shiny, freshly built, the kind of structure a young civilization put up to impress its first guests. He had seen that before. New species always tried to look bigger than they were during first contact. It was understandable. It was also usually obvious. Luna Station was not trying to impress anyone. It was old, not broken or dirty. It was very clean, very well cared for, every surface smooth and every light working, but it had the quiet weight of a place that had been there for a long time. The walls had a certain color that only came from centuries of use. The corridors were wide and well worn. The docking bay alone could hold at least 30 ships the size of Oreth Vaughn's, and the brackets on the walls showed that ships of many different shapes had docked here before. Not human ships, ships belonging to species he recognized, and some he did not. A woman was waiting for them when the airlock opened. She was old by human standards, though Oreth Vaughn did not know that yet. Her hair was white and cut short. She was not tall. She wore plain dark clothing with a small silver pin on her collar that he could not read. She looked at his delegation the way a grandmother looks at children who have come for a visit. Warm, patient, already knowing what questions they were going to ask. "Counselor Oreth Vaughn," she said. Her Velhari was perfect, accent and all. "I am Ambassador Sarah Voss. It is good to meet you in person." He replied in formal Velhari greeting, and she answered in the same without pause. Then she switched, smoothly and without warning, to an older dialect, one from the northern coastal regions of the Velhari homeworld that had not been spoken widely in over 200 years. Not as a show, not to be impressive. She said it the way someone says a thing when it simply comes naturally to them. Oreth Vaughn's translator bead flickered. It had not been programmed for that dialect. He looked at her. She smiled and continued in the standard tongue. "Come, I'll show you to your rooms. We've prepared a meal if you're hungry. We can talk as much or as little as you like today." She walked ahead of them through the corridors, pointing out things of interest, calm and unhurried. His delegation followed, and Oreth Vaughn noticed their eyes moving across the walls and the artifacts displayed in the wide hallways. There were plaques, dozens of them, maybe more. Each one bore a different script, a different symbol set, a different style of marking. He recognized a few. One was in Velhari, near the far end of a corridor. He glanced at it as they passed. It said in simple script, "First visit, year 2201. May our friendship grow long." That was over 180 years ago. The rooms were comfortable and designed with Velhari proportions in mind, which meant someone had studied what Velhari needed before this visit. The beds were the right height. The lighting was at the right temperature. The food laid out on the table had nothing in it that would make them sick, and several items had been prepared in ways that matched flavors he had not tasted since leaving home. He sat down and tried to think clearly. Ambassador Voss sat across from him and poured something hot into 2 cups and placed one in front of him. "You have questions," she said. "I have nothing but questions," he replied. She nodded. "That's expected. Take your time." He asked the most obvious one first. He asked how long humans had been in space. She told him, calmly, that human faster-than-light travel had been developed just over 600 years ago. He asked why they had not made contact sooner. She said, with a very small smile, that they had been busy. He asked what she meant by busy. She said they had been helping where they were needed, and trying not to get in the way where they were not. He wanted to push further. He wanted to ask about the sealed files, the plaques in the hallway, the old language she had used. But there was something about the way she sat, easy and without any hurry at all, that made him slow down. She was not hiding anything. She was not deflecting. She was simply not going to rush. That evening, after the others had gone to sleep, Oreth Vaughn sat at the small desk in his room and opened his personal data unit. He searched the open portions of the Galactic Archive for any records connected to humans or to Earth. Most files were sealed, but at the very bottom of a list of flagged items, one document had been left open. It was short. It was written in the formal language of the Keth Empire, a civilization that every species in the galaxy knew about, not because of their accomplishments, but because of their sudden and complete disappearance 300 years ago. No one knew exactly what had happened to the Keth. Their space had gone quiet. Their ships had stopped. Their homeworld no longer responded to any signal. The document was a warning, a simple one. It had been written, the metadata said, in the final decades of the Keth Empire. It said, "To all who make contact with the species called humans, do not threaten them, do not take from them, do not move against what they protect." We did all of these things. We believed they were small. We believed they were soft. We believed we had nothing to fear from a species that had never started a war. We were wrong. We are writing this so that others will not repeat our mistake. We are writing this because there is very little of us left to write anything at all. Oreth Vaughn sat with the screen in his hands for a long time. Outside the window, the blue planet turned slowly in the dark below, peaceful and lit from within, going about its business the way it always had. He finally understood that the Velhari had not initiated first contact with a young civilization. They had been the last ones at a very old party to finally walk through the door. The Galactic Archive was not an easy place to reach. It sat in empty space far from any sun. A massive structure built by a civilization so old that nobody living remembered their name. The archive had been maintained for the past 2,000 years by a collective of artificial intelligence systems that answered to no government, followed no laws except their own, and accepted visitors from every species without preference or prejudice. They stored everything. They forgot nothing. Oreth Vaughn had traveled there once before, years ago, as a student. He had spent 3 weeks in its reading rooms, and left feeling smaller than when he arrived, in the good way, the way that made you want to learn more. He requested a leave of absence from the Luna Station visit, and took a smaller ship. Ambassador Voss had nodded when he told her where he was going. She had not looked surprised. She had said simply, "Give our regards to the archive. We helped fund the East Wing." He filed that away and said nothing. The archive received him without ceremony. A tall, silver-colored AI guide met him at the docking bay and walked him to the research rooms. Oreth Vaughn told it what he was looking for. The guide was quiet for a moment, then said that many of the files related to humans were sealed. He said he knew. He asked to see everything that was not sealed. There was still quite a lot. He spent 2 weeks reading. What he found did not come to him all at once. It came in pieces, like a mosaic being built tile by tile. He would read one record, and it would point him to another. That record would connect to a third. Slowly, across many documents from many different species, the picture took shape. Humans had entered deep space quietly. No announcement, no broadcast, no declaration. The galaxy had not noticed them at first, which was apparently fine with humans. For the first several decades, they had simply traveled, learned, and listened. They made careful contact with a few small civilizations near their own region of space. They traded fairly. They asked good questions and did not overstay their welcome. Then the first war happened. 2 civilizations called the Marok and the Durathi had been fighting for over a century over a string of resource-rich planets. It was an old, tired war that neither side was winning, and both sides were dying in. Other species had tried to broker peace and failed. The Marok and Dorothy did not trust anyone who had something to gain from the outcome. A human named Dr. Yale Morrow showed up. The records did not say how she had known about the summit. They did not say how she had gotten through the security cordons around the negotiation station. They only recorded what had happened inside the room. Both delegations had already been seated and were in the process of refusing to speak to each other when a human woman walked in, sat down at the head of the table, set down a cup of something warm, and said, in perfect Marok, "Let's try this again." She had no weapons. She had no political authority. She represented no governing body. She had, as far as anyone in that room could determine, no leverage of any kind. She sat there for 11 days. She listened to both sides until they were tired of being angry. She found the places where their needs were not actually in conflict, and showed those places to each delegation one at a time. She brought in food and made them eat in the same room. On the 11th day, both delegations signed an agreement. Not a truce, a real agreement, with trade routes and shared resource access, and a communication line that was still active, as far as Orith Vaughn could tell from the records, to this day. That agreement became the first piece of what was later called the Accord of 12 Voices. The Accord was the foundational document of galactic peace. Every species in the galaxy knew about it. Most of them had signed it. It was the reason the last 300 years had been the most peaceful in recorded galactic history. It sat at the center of the entire framework of interstellar cooperation. He had learned it was written by a committee of great thinkers from 12 species. He had learned it was the product of decades of careful negotiation. He had not learned that the first draft had been written by Yale Morrow at that same table, after the Marok-Dorothy talks ended, on a long journey home, in her own handwriting. He set down the record he was reading, and put his hands flat on the desk. The archive guide was standing near the door. Orith Vaughn asked it how many other events like this there were in the open files. Events where a single human had walked into a crisis and changed the outcome. The guide said without pause, in the open files, 47 documented cases. In the sealed files, the number is higher. We are not authorized to specify. Orith Vaughn asked how many civilizations had come to the archive seeking information about humans. The guide said, "You are the 214th. He asked if any of them had found what they were looking for. The guide was quiet for a moment. Then it said, "Ambassador Voss has been notified of your visit. As she is notified of all such visits, she has sent a message for you." It handed him a small data card. He read it. The message said, "I hope the archive has been helpful. When you are ready, come to Earth. We will explain what the files cannot. Dinner will be ready. Sarah Voss." Orith Vaughn sat alone in the reading room of the oldest library in the galaxy, and felt the strange specific feeling of a question that had grown so large it could only be answered by a person sitting across a table from you. Earth was not what he expected. Orith Vaughn had by this point developed a mental image of the human homeworld. Given everything he had learned, the sealed files, the old station, the deep galactic influence, the Accord, the Keth warning, he had expected something like a seat of power, grand and deliberate, carefully impressive, the kind of world that knew it was important and made sure visitors understood that. Earth was loud. It was crowded and colorful and somewhat chaotic in the best possible way. The city where his shuttle landed was full of movement. Humans rushing through streets, vendors calling out to each other, children running ahead of slow-moving adults, music drifting from open windows. The air smelled like food and rain and something green. His first full breath of it surprised him. It was not clean in the way filtered ship air was clean. It was alive. Ambassador Voss met him at the landing platform. She was wearing the same kind of plain dark clothing as before. She had a bag over one shoulder. She looked like someone who had simply stepped out to run an errand. She took him not to a government building, not to a formal diplomatic hall, but to a wide-open campus on the edge of the city. It was called the Nairobi Continental Hub. From the outside, it looked like a university. Students moved between buildings. Gardens grew between the paths. People of many different kinds sat outside, eating and talking. "This is where we work," Voss said, leading him inside. The inside was a different matter. Deep below the campus, past several unmarked doors, was a facility that was every bit as serious as the surface was relaxed. Communication arrays, real-time feeds from 100 star systems, long halls of people at workstations, speaking quietly in dozens of languages, some of them not human languages at all. He saw 2 Marak diplomats in one room, comparing documents with a human analyst. He saw a Dorothy ship model pinned to one wall next to what appeared to be a star chart covered in handwritten notes. It was the center of something very large, dressed up to look like nothing special. Voss led him to a small room with a table and a window that looked out over the garden. She poured tea. She sat. She folded her hands and looked at him and said, "Ask me what you really want to know." He asked about the Keth. She did not flinch. She told him that the Keth Empire had, approximately 340 years ago, targeted a small colony of another species for what they called expansion. The colony was not military. It was families, farmers, a few 100,000 people on a quiet world who had nothing to do with any war. The humans had not sent a fleet. They had not fired a single shot. They had gone to every species in the Accord, one by one, and asked them a simple question. Was this something they were willing to allow to happen? Not in their name, not in the galaxy they shared. Was this acceptable? It was not. The response was an embargo so complete that the Keth could not buy food from outside their own systems. A quarantine so thorough that their ships could not dock anywhere. A coalition so unified that not one member broke from it, not even the ones who privately did not like humans very much, because the question was not about humans. It was about what kind of galaxy they all wanted to live in. The Keth Empire lasted another 42 years. It collapsed under the weight of its own isolation. No invasion, no war, no dramatic final battle. Just the slow, quiet, absolute consequence of having done something that the rest of the galaxy had decided was not going to be permitted. Orith Vaughn was silent for a while. Then he asked the question that had been under all the other questions since the very beginning. He asked why, with all of this, humans had never called themselves what they so clearly were. Voss looked at him with an expression that was not quite amusement, and not quite sadness. "What do you think we are?" she asked. "The ones who decide," he said. She shook her head. "The ones who made sure someone could," she said. "There's a difference." She explained what they called the long game, and she explained it in the simple, direct way of someone who had explained it many times before. Humans had entered the galaxy and found 1,000 civilizations making the same mistakes over and over, fighting over small things, breaking the trust they had built over old wounds, choosing short gains over long peace. Humans had made those same mistakes themselves for a very long time on their own world. They knew where those mistakes led. So they had chosen a different path. Not rulership, not control, just presence, consistency. Being the species that showed up, that kept its word, that asked the hard questions before the fighting started, that held the line on the one thing that could not be permitted, which was the destruction of the helpless. They had built the Accord not to lead it, but to make sure it existed and kept working. They had filled it with voices from everywhere, because a peace kept only by one species was not a peace at all. "We didn't want an empire," Voss said. "We wanted a neighborhood." Orith Vaughn picked up his cup and turned it in his hands. Outside the window, the garden was moving in a light wind. "The Velhari took a long time to reach out," Voss said. "We were starting to wonder if you were afraid of us." "We did not know you existed," he said. "Not really. Not what you were." "And now?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Now I think we were the last people at a party that had already been going on for centuries." Voss smiled. It was the warmest smile he had seen from her, and he had seen a few by now. "We're glad you finally knocked," she said. The Velhari High Council chamber was very quiet. That was unusual. The chamber was almost never quiet. 14 counselors from 14 member species filled it at every session, and they were rarely in agreement about anything, which meant that noise was the default condition of the room. Arguments, counter-arguments, the shuffling of documents, the murmur of side conversations. It was a room built for productive disagreement. But right now, every counselor was looking at Oreth Von, and none of them were talking. He had just finished his report. It had taken 3 hours. He had not used many dramatic pauses or formal flourishes. He had simply told them what he had seen, what he had read, and what Ambassador Voss had said to him over tea in a garden in the city of Nairobi. He had told it plainly, in plain language, the way the humans had explained things to him. The silence stretched out. Then Counselor Death Ron, who led the security committee and who was skeptical of almost everything, spoke first. He said that this sounded like exactly the kind of story a very powerful species would tell to keep others from challenging them. He said the sealed files were suspicious. He said the whole thing felt like a trap. Oreth Von had expected this. He let Death Ron finish. Then he asked the council one question. He asked them to name one war in the last 300 years that humans had started. Silence. He asked them to name one planet that humans had taken by force. More silence. He asked them to name one species that humans had destroyed. The silence this time felt different. It felt like understanding arriving, not all at once but in pieces, the way the mosaic had come together for him in the archive reading room. They have had faster-than-light travel for 600 years, he said. They have had the trust of more than 200 civilizations. They have had the knowledge and the connections and the relationships to take anything they wanted. If they were building a trap, it is the slowest, most patient, most expensive trap in the history of the galaxy. And for what? We have nothing they need. We have nothing they want. They don't want our resources or our space or our loyalty. He paused. They want us to be worth knowing. He let that sit in the room for a moment. The Accord is not a human empire, he continued. It is a framework that humans built and then filled with everyone else's voices because they understood something that most civilizations learned too late. The galaxy is too big and life is too difficult for any one species to carry it alone. They made something that does not belong to them. They made it, and then they stepped back and let it belong to everyone. Counselor Deathron was quiet. The others were quiet. Outside the high windows of the chamber, the Velhari homeworld's pale sun was setting, turning the sky the color of old copper. The vote was not close. The Velhari submitted their application to the Galactic Accord Commission 3 days later. The response came back in 40 minutes, which was fast even by human standards. It was a formal welcome letter from the Accord Secretariat, signed by its current rotating chair, a Merak diplomat named Velos, who had apparently been waiting for this application for quite some time. It included a complete packet of information, access codes to the open portions of the Galactic Archive, an invitation to the next full summit, and a personal note from Ambassador Sarah Voss that said, "Well done, see you soon." 6 months later, Oreth Von stood at a wide window in Luna Station. He was there as a Velhari observer to the quarterly Accord Summit, which was happening in the Great Hall 3 floors below him. He could hear the sound of it, not arguments, but talk, the busy, productive sound of many different kinds of people working through hard things together. There were delegates from 215 civilizations in that room. He had met a few of them already, a young Darathi diplomat who had brought his children to show them the station. 2 Morak engineers comparing notes with a human researcher over what appeared to be a very complicated diagram. A species he did not recognize yet, newly arrived, standing very close together, and looking at everything with wide eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of himself 6 months ago. He heard footsteps, and did not need to turn to know who it was. Ambassador Voss came to stand beside him. She was carrying 2 cups, and held one out to him. He took it. They stood together and looked out at the stars. He had noticed, in the time he had spent around her, that she was rarely the loudest person in any room. She did not need to be. People came to her. They sought her out, from a dozen different species, with their complicated problems and their stubborn disagreements, and she listened to all of them with the same patience she had shown him on that first day in the docking bay. She was not young. She had been doing this for a very long time, and she showed no sign of stopping. "What is the best part of this job?" he asked. He was not sure why he asked it. It came out before he could decide if it was the right question. She thought about it for a moment, looking out at the dark. "Every few decades," she said, "a new species finally decides to say hello. They come in nervous, or suspicious, or amazed, or some combination of all 3. She paused. "And we get to watch them realize that they were never alone. That while they were looking up at the stars and wondering, someone was already out here. That the galaxy is not empty." She took a sip of her drink. "It doesn't get old." Orith Vaughn looked out at the stars too. He thought about the Velhari homeworld, the pale copper sunsets, the High Council chamber, the long years his species had spent building their collective in the belief that they were among the few advanced civilizations in a mostly empty galaxy. He thought about the probe they had sent, the 17 seconds it had taken to get a response. He thought about 214 other civilizations who had stood roughly where he was standing now, looking out the same window, trying to rearrange everything they thought they knew. Somewhere out on the far edge of the galaxy, a new signal was stirring. It was faint, just beginning, the kind of signal a young civilization sends out when it builds its first radio tower and aims it at the sky without really expecting an answer. Somewhere in the lower levels of Luna Station, a junior analyst with careful hands and tired eyes was pulling the signal from the noise, flagging it, logging it, routing it to the appropriate queue. The queue was already long. It always was. Ambassador Voss would get to it. She always did. She would read the signal carefully. She would draft a reply in the language they were most likely to understand. She would wait for the right moment, patient as the stars themselves, and then she would reach back across the dark and say hello. And somewhere on a small world circling an unremarkable sun, someone would receive that message and stop breathing for a second. And then they would not be alone anymore.